The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our program for today here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And joined on the panel today with Bishop Doc Loomis, who's Bishop in Residence at All Saints Anglican Church in Newport, and also Reverend Mark Woods, pastor at Cherry Point United Methodist Church in Havelock. And I'm Ben Ball. Glad to have everybody here.
Yeah, good to be here.
Robert is off at a conference today. Robert Cornegie usually joins us on this panel. Today, let's start with a story about prayer that comes out of Cleveland County, out of Shelby, North Carolina. The Cleveland County Board of Education, this is an AP story, is looking into the process of implementing prayer at its meetings. Multiple media outlets reported the board voted Monday night to have the superintendent's office to look into what the board would have to do to have prayer at the meetings. The board already opened some meetings with a moment of silence. During Monday's meeting, those in the audience recited the Lord's Prayer during that moment of silence. The board asked for a report on prayer at the board meeting for November's meeting. Now, it's interesting that the Charlotte Observer kind of came at it from a slightly different angle, saying, again, talking about what they did vote for, which the divided Cleveland County School Board voted 8-2 Monday night to continue opening its meetings with a moment of silence, not prayer, but they did ask for, as the Charlotte Observer reports, a report on what it would take to have prayer at meetings. Some interesting quotes are in there. We'll get into this sometime, but Doc, this is not a new argument. This is an argument that a lot of boards, a lot of administrative boards have been discussing, arguing, and being sued over for a long time.
It's funny. My dad was the president of the school board where I come from.
Oh, really?
And he they always prayed before the meetings. It was never a thing. When the move came to when school prayer started leaving the school itself, then the school board started wrestling with the same issue. And the one thing I remember about that was something our pastor told us at a small rural church. He said, well, if they're not going to let us pray at the meeting, then I think that we as churches ought to intercede during the meeting. So for me, this whole thing comes down to, let me put it this way. All these articles seem to have the same thing. Prayer at a meeting is like whether we're serving Coca-Cola at a meeting. Mm-hmm. But the real deal here is, what's the effect? What are we trying to accomplish by doing that prayer? And I think one of the things that our pastor knew a long time ago was, if what you really want is godly decisions to be made and to be people filled and led by the Spirit during those meetings, for peace to reign, for wise judgment, whatever, then these same churches ought to just be interceding. So Monday night from 7 to 9, the churches should be holding prayer vigils for the school board. Isn't that a silly response?
No, not at all. Actually, we often call on our churches to do that when we meet as churches and church conferences and things. We call on prayer vigils to be held at the same time, so why not for governmental meetings too? I think it's a pretty good response. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that response. You could also say that your church members need to be at the school board meetings, the ones that are open. Mm-hmm. A lot of us don't really pay attention to that kind of stuff. So
right.
If you want kind of a Christian presence there, then,
mm-hmm.
Go to the meeting.
By your presence. Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I think the whole debate, we were talking before we started about prayer and stuff like that, that the fact that we're saying that prayer shouldn't be in certain places might actually betray the fact that prayer actually does something. Mm-hmm. That it is a dangerous thing, that it is, it can do things and it can affect people in certain ways, and that's precisely what we might want prayer to do. Neil Postman writes a book, I think it's Amusing Ourselves to Death, maybe, and he says if people really knew what prayer and church and this Christian thing actually did, when you went to church or anywhere else where they were praying, you'd wear a helmet and gloves and knee pads and elbow pads, because it can be a dangerous thing. And so on some level, those who try to attack prayer and say, it shouldn't be in these things, they're actually taking it more seriously than some of us who just are kind of indifferent about whether prayer is there or not. So I think it's kind of ironic in that way.
Yeah. Now, we also have some comments that go along with this article that sometimes either maybe help and sometimes hurt the discussion on this. In the Charlotte Observer article, Cleveland County Sheriff's Captain Joel Shores says, we think God should be in our lives and in everything we do. And we are seeing progressive try to slowly remove everything that what we feel our forefathers fought for. And it's time for Christians to stand up. Now, in the Associated Press article, it's interesting that who they quoted in their article on this, and they quoted a board member, Jerry Hoyle, said he's worried about potential lawsuits and their expenses. Hoyle also said he did not want to give members of non-Christian faiths a platform to speak or pray in front of children at the meetings. Sometimes
just inviting lawsuit.
Yeah, sometimes we would maybe in favor of this would wish they would not say these things. It's something that's been problematic for a lot of people, and it's this tension that we often talk about, tension between state and the church. Is that where is this expressed and where does this go and how does this I think, Mark, you make a powerful argument. After all, it was the evil spirits that recognized Jesus and knew exactly who he was and what he was about. So it's the people who are perhaps anathema to prayer that recognize exactly how powerful it may be. What do you think, Doc?
Well, I agree with both of you. Yeah. Because I'd be the odd man out if I didn't, but I do. And the thing that gets me about this is the argument. There's two primary arguments why we shouldn't do prayer at these meetings. One is it's going to be very expensive to fight the lawsuit. I find it humorous in a way. I mean, that is the tack that's being used to squash it. But again, then show up a half hour before the meeting and pray before the meeting, avoid the lawsuit, accomplish the same goal. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are ways to do this. The Lord is like a mighty ocean. He washes around every obstacle. So just wash around it. Find another way to do it.
Well, it's like the meet at the pole events that are held in some schools. Some students do, where they meet beforehand to pray.
Right.
Before school officially starts.
Precisely. And we have a story about that, about a football guy we can get to later. But the other argument that's usually used is that we don't want to cause pain and suffering, to Mark's point. Mm-hmm. That it causes dissension in the meeting. Well, having been raised by a president of a school board, every school board meeting causes dissension. Welcome to the democratic process. Yeah. I mean, you get into a meeting and you make a vote that this year we're going to limit the football team to 30 people because we don't have money to do the normal 50. 20 parents are going to be really angry. I mean, what school board meeting ever existed? And if it is a democratic process, then I guess they should take a vote on whether or not they want to pray, just the same way they take a vote on whether or not they want to play.
Now, what about the comment, though, about the one about non-Christian faiths? I lived in a Jewish neighborhood, never had an issue between my Christian faith and my Jewish neighbor's faith. We just did not conflict on that. We visited each other's houses. We prayed. We said grace before meals when they were at our house.
Right.
We celebrated with them. So. Yeah. I just didn't see. I don't see that.
I don't get from Hoyle's comments that he's trying to, and I could be completely wrong, that he's trying to sort of, tout prayer as something that they need to do and it's good and all that. It seems to me sometimes when we define ourselves over and against something else. And so it seems to me that his comments are very much Christianity needs to stand up. Christianity needs to fight against these other things. We need to have Christian prayer in the board meeting. And sometimes I think that's a good thing, okay? But then other times I think it sort of betrays our own insecurity in our Christianity to where we have to define ourselves over and against something else in order to find some form of identity. And I kind of, from the comments that were quoted, he probably said a lot more than that. Mm-hmm. But, from the comments that were quoted, I think the latter seems to be where I think those comments come from, like with the comment that you quoted about the children and the non-faith. Right. It seems like it's standing over and against something so that I can have my identity in a certain way. And I'm not so sure that's always helpful.
In other words, you would say that a more mature Christian faith would stand on its own, would not stand against something, but on its own.
I think that's right. I think essentially it would stand on its own. It would not have to define itself over and against something. Because as soon as you push against something in that way, you give it what, I'm going to use a giant word here, you give it ontological purchase, meaning, in other words, you give it reality. So if I, push against something that I think is there, I give it a sense of reality. And I think what he has done, and I think that's why we all said in the break when we read that last comment that he sort of fell upon his own sword, right? He kind of gave that other thing a complete reality.
Yeah, I think I think this is brilliant what you're saying right now.
Oh wow!
No, it really is, because it really defines this thing. It really asks a very important question, and I think you've actually answered it correctly, and that is, Christianity in and of itself is either about what's being accomplished here, and if this guy was really concerned about what's being accomplished, we've already said there's 100 different ways to Tuesday he could have done it.
And you said
but if he's concerned about how it looks or what his identity is based on, then he's stuck in this ongoing argument.
Right.
That's a really good response.
Right. No, I think that's right.
And I'll also give you one of the just to throw a little monkey wrench into it. One of the things that prevents these boards from meeting ahead of time to pray is that they would have to announce that as a meeting. That would be a public meeting if they had too many of them in one place at one time. And that becomes part of the conundrum there. We have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and thanks for joining us. And again, joined by Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Mark Woods, and I'm Ben Bald, and we were talking about prayer in the first segment, and really about the power of prayer is revealed sometimes when those who argue against it, and maybe even more so sometimes than those who argue for it. But let's talk about another issue that actually came up in the news this morning as we were recording on a Thursday. It was a story out of Bremerton, Washington, and Doc, you were telling me about this first.
Yeah, this is actually what I woke up to this morning, and having read the other articles, I thought, boy, this is kind of a similar thing. So here's a high school football coach who started walking out on the field at the end of a game and just standing there alone and praying. That's it. And then somebody kind of caught on to what he was doing, and so a few of his players came out on the field, and they stood with him. Before long, the entire team was going out on the field. Then the visiting teams began doing it, and not only in the home stadium, but also in the visiting stadiums. and so it became this giant prayer scrum in the middle of the field. Well, his school board has told this lovely man that at the game coming this weekend, which will have passed by the time we air this show, that he is not permitted to go out onto the field at the conclusion of the game and pray. And he has vowed, and is standing with his attorneys from Liberty, he has vowed that he actually is going to get out there and pray. That's the story. And I love it. I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. This is being contested here at this high school in Bremerton, Washington, but it actually takes place. If you look closely at the end of NFL games, you often find a small group, or sometimes a large group, or sometimes some college games that will get together and pray. They don't comment on it on air. You just know what they're doing when they get together. So this isn't unusual. What is unusual here is the length and breadth that it's being taken to contest this. To say he may lose his job over it.
Right, and the contesting is, of course, because this is a public school, and as we all know, you can't have God in a public school because that violates the Constitution. We all know that, right?
Well, apparently the folks of Liberty have been successfully defending that argument that the idea of the exercise prohibiting I'm going to forget how it's phrased in the Constitution, but can't prohibit the exercise there too of religion. Yeah. So the exercise being more than just what you do in your church on a Sunday morning. So
yeah, I don't know which one of you said it before we started, but I do love the image. I want to see next Monday on Fox News the the police coming down and lifting this guy up and carrying him off the
Yes.
field like Rudy in reverse, kind of.
Reverse Rudy. Yeah.
Yeah, throw him in the Kim Davis Memorial Cell.
Exactly.
Yeah, it provides a good story too. I mean, he gets fired. What'd you get fired for? I got fired for praying. Well, that's a win in the Christian's book, you know.
What are you in for?
Yeah, what are you in for?
For praying.
That's interesting.
But this is, again, we see this now. Is this the culmination of what started really with Madeline Murray O'Hare? You know, it started with the idea of taking prayer out of public places. Because, I mean, you can make Christian arguments for doing that, for saying that, well, what kind of prayer are you talking about? You know, are we talking, you know, who's praying and what are they praying to? Is this just are we reaching that point of saturation now, where it's just been so overkill about taking God out of the public square?
Well, there's a deafening silence.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to let Doc answer this one.
Well, you know, here a lot of this comes back to whether we are a Christian and a democratic Christian nation, whether or not this is what the majority of the people just want. Give me an example here. So at the end of the football game here at West Carteret, a group of Muslims take their prayer rugs out into the middle of the field and they kneel on them and they begin, you know, praying. What kind of a response does that generate?
I would be thinking about whether or not it was a muddy field. What the laundry bill would be.
Yes,
but
you would be thinking that.
I would not, because it wouldn't bother me.
Right.
I mean, it wouldn't bother me.
Okay, because it's no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
Right? This is
It's
people
not-
freely exercising their faith.
And it's not the stumbling block to my faith, to me,
Right.
if I want to put it in Corinthian
Right.
terms.
That's a key. I think that's a key, Ben. That is not a stumbling block to you. I think if that happened and I was at the game, I'd be like, well, goodness, why am I and Bishop Loomis not out there praying as well?
Yeah,
you
really.
know, after a game, why should we not be out there praying as well? You know.
Yeah.
But I think that's a key. I think it's not a stumbling block to my own faith, and so often we see those things as that, and those who are trying to get this coach not to pray, they see it as a stumbling block, right?
Because there is no faith there.
Right.
It's a stumbling block to the secular world. Because when we go out there and do this thing in the power that you were talking about earlier, then what they're hearing is, we have something that you don't have.
Which is probably true.
Which is absolutely true. But I don't want, if I'm a secularist, I don't want to hear that.
Right.
I want to think that my way of living is achieving and garnering all the things that your way of living is too.
Right.
I can have social justice, I can have peace, I can have wealth and blessing and happiness, but I don't have to have God.
Right.
Right. So that's the offense.
And I mean, the scriptures are, you know, there's a lot in there about this is going to offend, you know. Prayer offends, you know, Christ offends, and that kind of thing. So this is probably shouldn't be too surprising for us Christians.
Yeah, you know, let me bring in this other story here about Atlanta. The fire chief in Atlanta, we talked about him some time ago, where he got fired because he put out a book that had just a small part of the book, but it had part of it that was alleged to be disparaging towards homosexuals, and because he stated what he felt his faith teaches about that. And he wrote a book independently, obviously, of the fire department. He had been the Atlanta fire chief. He was actually named for a national position too under President Obama's administration originally, like in 2009, and then went back to Atlanta to be their fire chief. And in this, he put out a book. He shared it with some of his co-workers with whom he had a previous relationship of establishing as believers. So he wasn't proselytizing here, but it made its way though to openly gay councilmen on the Atlanta City Council, who then brought it to the police chief, who found it, or the commissioner, or whatever, his boss, who found it objectionable, and then placed him on unpaid leave. Now he's brought a federal lawsuit about this. And in the federal lawsuit, some of the testimony, according to his attorney from the Alliance Defending Freedom, Senior Counsel David Cortman, this is an article in the Daily Signal today. It says that the city of Atlanta made dangerous admissions in a court hearing. This happened yesterday on the 14th. But the city actually argued that you're entitled to have beliefs and opinions, but you have to keep them to yourself inside the four walls of your house or your church, that you shouldn't bring them out into the public, and you shouldn't bring them out if you're employed by a government agency. Again, this seems to be runs counter to the Constitution in many ways, but I was thinking about this when you're making your last statements there, Mark, is that what prayer does and what Christians do is, I mean, some believe that powers or that without faith want to keep us in a bubble, want to keep us in our own protective area. But really what we do is burst their bubble, is burst the bubble that some without faith want to establish around a community and around the areas that they control. In many ways, prayer or Christian life or a Christian example or presence even sometimes bursts that open, is dangerous to them.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, there's a real, well, we've talked about this before. There's a real push towards tolerance and inclusiveness, and it just seems like if that is where we're going to go with tolerance and inclusiveness, which I have my own thoughts on all that, but is that part of that tolerance would be to allow myself to be offended by another, to allow myself to be offended by someone who doesn't share my belief or something like that. And it would go both ways. But it seems like oftentimes tolerance becomes tolerant of only those who we think are tolerant, right? And that's just not tolerance. That's just another form of non-tolerance or something like that. Or we want to include those who also want to include everyone. But we're not going to include those who do not want to include everyone. So it kind of falls in on itself sometimes. And this might be sort of fleshing that out a little bit with this fire chief here.
Yeah, I think you're right. In fact, it just reminded me, I was watching Jeopardy the other night, and the category was antonyms, and so they asked what the antonym of antonym is. And that's what we're doing with tolerance, is that we're describing it by describing its opposite. And accepting that as being, that's what tolerance is.
And here's the amazing thing about this guy, about Chief Cochran, that I love, and it comes up they only kind of briefly mention this, but here's a guy that was the fire chief for 7 years. And during that 7 years, he did not, in fact, he was not ever even accused of discrimination at any level. So here's a guy who's clearly a Christian, has very specific and Christian beliefs about things, who's taken the time to write a book, and in it expresses some of those beliefs. And yet, on the job, the very job that he got suspended and fired from, never discriminated. He was faithful to Caesar in that regard. He did his job.
Yes.
And he actually, here's a guy who's really, I mean, I think this case actually has a lot of merit.
Oh yeah, it absolutely does. He has no record of having been disciplined for anything that would be remotely connected with his faith. So no record of that at all until this book came out. So again, it says, where in the public square, I mean, where does that public square end? Does it end with at my typewriter, at my computer? Is I'm no longer allowed to express that there? So we have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and thanks for joining us here today. I'm Ben Ball, and joined by Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Mark Woods. We're talking about, in this segment, about an article that came out in Religious News Service. No, actually, I'm sorry, this was on NPR, from an interview in NPR, with Reverend Rob Shank, who's of the National Clergy Council. And he is talking about he's president of Faith in Action. He's an anti-abortion activist who believes gun ownership and the use of guns is a decision best decided by community leaders, not by the government. I'm not sure what the difference is there, but he is the subject of a soon-to-be released documentary, The Armor of Light, which focuses on his changing stance on gun ownership. Those views were affected by the 2013 shooting at the D.C. Navy Yard, according to the Washington Post. For years, Reverend Rob Schenck led nonviolent protests as an anti-abortion activist, focusing on abortion as the primary sanctity of human life issue. But everything changed after the 2013 D.C. Navy Yard shooting that left 13 people dead. A new documentary called The Armor of Light tracks Schenck as he decided that one cannot be both pro-life and also pro-guns. I'll be very candid. I haven't felt that it's our issue until we end up kneeling in prayer outside the Navy Yard gates in my neighborhood where my apartment building was in lockdown. He says the film will be released October 30th. So suddenly it goes from theoretical to very realistic. He goes on to talk a little bit more about it, and we will bring that up. But Bishop Limesy, Doc, as this story takes place, you can see the effect on him as often will happen with people when something happens in their neighborhood, in their backyard, or in their family. You see some things that change in effect. Do you think that has as much influence on his stance here as his pro-life stance? Absolutely,
there's no question. And you might add to this that at the end of this particular article, it talks a little bit about his personal views, what's happening in his own personal life. And one of the things he acknowledges in the end is that several members of his family, he says, have taken their own lives in gun-related suicides. So I think, yes, absolutely. It's not just the neighborhood, but certainly in his own family. He's had an experience where guns equate to bad. And so, yes, it's hugely influential, I'm sure. This is a highly emotional issue for him.
And triggered, though, is even though it was not apparently triggered by all these past events in his previous understanding of what are the biggest sanctity of life issues, it was once his own apartment was in lockdown, and he's looking out his window at all the things that are going on around the Navy Yard that day. So it's an interesting concept there, and also, reality for him. Mark, you had talked even last week about the difficulty that you would have in making a Christological argument for gun violence, right?
Yeah, I do. For any kind of violence, I think I would probably argue not just gun violence, but just violence in general. I do think there's probably some personal issues there for him. I would like to see the documentary and see what kind of arguments they make for gun control or gun ownership, and kind of judge it on those arguments, on whether those are good arguments. I think that this makes headlines too, because he was an evangelical who's changing his position, and usually evangelicals, I think the article says that, are more for gun ownership, and I think that he's seeing a disjunct between the even just the language of pro-life, right, and guns, and we brought that up before we started recording this session. But I think that there's something to be made about that argument. I always say JP too. Is that disrespectful? But John Paul II, in one of his encyclicals, talks about kind of the culture of death. He doesn't explicitly in that encyclical talk about guns, but he's obviously talking about abortion. And so I don't think it's too far of a stretch to talk about where we're talking about a sanctity of life, or life in one respect, and also the way in which guns may contribute to it. I don't think I would be in favor as much as he is, but I don't know. I'd have to really see what it is. But in regards to his argument, I do think that's a conversation that could be fruitful.
Well, and he has, and you mentioned this ahead of time, and I agree with you. He has actually, his argument is, let's make this a personal decision. His statements about local leadership notwithstanding,
right.
His real argument is, look, this is something we really need to think about and make decisions on our own, regardless of what the government allows us to do. Is it a good idea? Is it a good moral decision? Should I do it? Now, he has a twist on that, and of course, his decision is made in part because he says, I just don't think I trust myself having a gun. Again, based on some things that have happened in his own life, and that's where he's coming from. But I actually like the idea that we do have that we can make our own moral decisions based on what we believe. And he's just saying, look, I think if you really think this thing through, you're going to see that it's not a good idea to have a gun. I'm sure his Christology would line up a lot with yours.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, I don't know. Maybe I'm building up a straw man here. Okay, go ahead, Ben.
Let me read a little bit more. He says, part of the interview from NPR, he says about his calls for gun control on a personal level rather than a legal level. He says, ultimately, we'll all make decisions what we'll do, whether we'll own a lethal weapon and use it or not. We've had a long discussion in this country, decades long, on gun control. That is government gun control. For me, this is a question of self-control, regardless of what law may allow me to do. I appeal to a higher law. I've said publicly that in our respecting of the Second Amendment, we have to be very careful we don't break the Second Commandment, which is a commandment against idolatry. We set up our own idolatry when we declare ourselves the arbiters of right and wrong, and especially of the value of human life. Where do you follow him on that argument there?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I would probably use more theological language in there, but
he's not really arguing for government gun control.
He's not. In
That's
fact,
right.
Yeah.
he might be arguing against government gun control on some level because he wants to move it to a kind of personal level. Which is what you said, Doc, where we can make our own
which is really
decisions.
a rights and responsibilities kind of argument. I mean, is that we have rights to do so, but we also can choose not to.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that it's a rights situation. The only kind of hesitation I would have is in the same way that he says I don't trust myself with a gun. I don't always trust my own individual mind with moral decisions, right? I feel like in order for me to make a moral decision, I need a community around me to help me make that decision. And the community that I believe does that well is the church. I mean, that's what I would say. The church is there to sort of make these decisions. So if he wants to just throw it up to just personal decision, I would be... If he means by that kind of each individual making their own decision, my wife would tell you when Mark makes his own individual decision, it's not always the right decision, right? I mean, that's partly why God has given me this wife to help me make better decisions. And so I think that oftentimes talking about guns, talking about violence needs to be talked about in the church community. What is our ideas on violence, on gun control, on these kinds of things. And that decision is made with all the body sort of present. And by the body, I mean the church.
And he doesn't, I mean, he's there with you. He really is, because at the end of the article, he says, basically, I'm going to shift to where my people are at, where they're comfortable, the law of the heart. So he is saying, generally speaking, this is where my faith community is at, and I want to put myself in that position of what he would call the truth in that community. So I think he's walking along with you. We should really take him to lunch. We'd probably have a lot of fun.
But the article really he starts out as if he's going to be changing from a anti-abortion advocate to an anti-gun advocate, an advocate, but he's not really. Towards the end of the argument, he says about how he responds to people who own guns for self-defense. He says, I understand that impulse, and I respect it. I don't impugn people's motives on that. I think a lot of those people are sincere, and that it's a noble inclination that we have. Now, whether the handgun...
That's a long bless your heart statement, right there.
On some level, that's probably...
Yeah, that's right. And now, whether the handgun, a lethal weapon, is the best way to manage that security for yourself, or you would choose, what was the other argument, the ancient argument, just run?
Run, yeah. That's Augustine.
Augustine's argument, yeah. And your family is another question. Sometimes a handgun can be a shortcut in the equation. I know you used to hear it called a permanent solution for a temporary problem. But we were talking earlier about this, about the respect for the power of, then fill in the blank. It's the power of prayer, the power of gun, the power of any number of things. And that respect is a kind of a different theological argument, isn't it? than just say don't do this?
Yeah, I think so. Well, go ahead. You were gonna, okay. I think so, and I think that respect too has a level of what you might call not mistrust, but fear in some level, that we have to, as soon as we have whatever that fill in the blank was that you said, Ben, like, okay, let's say gun. As soon as we have a gun and we bring ourselves to the point where we're like, I have mastered this. I am no longer afraid of it. I can protect myself completely. That is usually when trouble arises, right? There has to be a level of trepidation. Is that the right word? There has to be a level of fear with that thing. And this is not a foreign concept to Christians. I mean, this is wisdom literature in the scripture.
Fear and trembling.
The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. And that is a fear that's a respect. We like to talk about it as respect. But I also think it is a level of I got to do
fear. What's right.
Yeah. Or I'm going to fall into sin, or I'm going to fall into the pit, or something like this. And there's a level of fear there.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and joined by Reverend Mark Woods and Bishop Dr. Loomis, and we're talking about different issues. Now, this one, again, our last segment for today, so let's talk about something a little bit perhaps lighter. This comes from Pinkerton, Ohio. An Ohio church congregation ordered a pizza from Domino's during the service and then tipped the driver more than $1,000 that had been collected for the offering. The driver brought the $5.99 pizza. They did order the special, by the way. $5.99 pizza to Sycamore Creek Church in Pinkerton in suburban Columbus on October 4th. The Reverend Steve Markle brought her on stage and asked her the biggest tip she'd ever received. She said about $10. That's when Markle told her that the teaching at the church had been about generosity, so the congregation had taken up an offering for the driver and gave her that offering of more than $1,000. She broke into tears. The Columbus Dispatch reports that the congregation was wrapping up a sermon series on I was broke, now I'm not. The church draws about 500-600 people each week. I'd love to hear what the rest of this series is about, or its scriptural basis. But in any case, I thought I'd bring this to you. Just what about this as an act of community? Is this just sort of showboat? What do you think's going on here? Anybody want to take a stab at this one?
I have no idea. I've never been more embarrassed to be a Christian minister in my life.
Tell us what you really think, Doc.
I have no idea. First of all, I'll go back to the name of the series. I was broke, now I'm not. If they mean I was broken,
yes.
And now I'm not.
Yes.
I'm walking with them.
Yeah.
If it's I was broken, now I'm not. Well, having not experienced that personal uplift and blessing, I say, well, okay, feels a little like prosperity stuff to me. Now, what I really think though is that $1,046 is a lot of money, and I'm sure the little girl left happy and blessed. I don't know if she left a Christian, but she left happy and blessed and a little richer. But the way I understand generosity is that when I'm generous, my right hand doesn't, or my left hand doesn't know what my right hand is doing. That generosity is something best served in the dark. And this is not only doing it in the light of day, but it's actually making a point of the doing it in a kind of what feels like a pretty showboaty way to me. Mm-hmm. Now, I know at Mark's church, they do this every week. They invite a random person in off the street and they bless them. But, you're
going to have pizza trucks lined up outside the church.
That is not true, everyone.
So, but is this, is this, again, something that would fire up your congregation there, Mark, or what do you think?
I think that there probably were some in the congregation that were excited for a little while about, well, we should give more on some level. But I would probably agree with Bishop Loomis here that this is just, rarely do I find when I read where giving and generosity is not supposed to be an act of humility or humbleness. and maybe even anonymous on some level. And that's part of what we give, why we give is to be humble, to be anonymous on some level.
Why we give is to bring glory to God.
Well, yeah, I understand.
So what the right hand is doing,
right,
has to be what we have to let people see what God is doing, right?
Right. And this is definitely not that. It is not. It is kind of showboaty and that kind of thing. But I understand that was it Markle was the pastor?
Mm-hmm.
I think he's trying to make a point to be more generous with things, and I imagine in our society generosity would be a good thing, but it probably fades away, especially things that are giant and showboaty like this often fade quicker than a kind of more humble giving.
Okay, let me put this in another way. So here's what's happening. We have this person who walks in, with the pizza, and it doesn't even mention what the toppings are. So I'm suspect already as to what you get for $5.99 in Ohio. I have no idea.
I think $5.99 was the medium pizza special. Probably.
Medium pizza special. Okay, so here's the thing about that. Now they bring this person up on the stage, which I assume they mean the chancel, and
no, they probably mean stage.
They probably do mean the stage.
Yeah.
And they blow her away. I mean, she's gasping. It says that she's.
I'm looking at the picture of her right now. Actually.
Is she gasping in the picture?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the question is that all right? Here's what I'm the pastor. I'm going to show my congregation the effects of giving. See, all right. That's not what Christian generosity is about. The effect of giving is that one would come to know and love God more, that they would see Him. It's not a matter of that person being ecstatic and everybody in the church, see how good you feel when you give? No. It's see how much God there is in what you're doing here. And He's doing exactly the opposite of that. He's making it about me.
I may be the only one in this room old enough to remember this, but there used to be a TV show on called The Millionaire. It was a great premise of a TV show. It was some benefactor, obviously multimillionaire, billionaire, whatever, would offer every week $1 million check, and it would be and you never see the guy. The person was anonymous, but he offered to this person who would deliver it, his agent. He delivered to somebody who was named by the millionaire, by the benefactor. He didn't know them from Adam, didn't know them at all. Who would walk into them, and then you would see what would happen to their lives by this. What always struck me as funny was it was $1 million tax-free, too, by the way. But it was what would happen to their lives afterwards. It would be the storyline. Mm-hmm. Some would be changed by it and would do wonderful things. And some would be very modest, humble people would do that. Others would blow it, in 30 seconds. But it was a great storyline. Now, here in this, in another article, is from Christianity Today, who ran an article on this, says that in a Who We Are message on their website, Sycamore Creek Church says its mission is to change the world by changing lives. So do they believe that a life was changed here, or was it just a, one-time event? We don't know that, of course.
Yeah, I think Doc's point would be, I'm going to quote you, that's all right, and then you can fix it, but God's the one who changes lives. Giving $1,000 is probably not going to change somebody's life all that much. It'll make them feel good for a little while, probably, but I think that, and I think what Doc's saying is that's not what giving is about. Giving is an act of obedience. I mean, it's an act of obedience to God, and it's to give glory to God. It's to show forth God's glory. And I think that probably the opposite has happened there.
I just want to say, but for all the people who do donate to my ministry here in town, this doesn't apply to you. You can please feel free to continue to donate.
Please give
to the fund here. We appreciate that. Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Although I'd take a pizza right now.
I'm hungry too.
I wanted to know what happened to the pizza. This is the idea, though, of the theological understanding of giving is important, because I think that our congregations often don't really get that, and we don't. It's our fault if we're not conveying that message well enough. Like for me, about when it came to a decision to tithe, it was like, I can't do anything but that. I have to do this. Yeah. It's like I mean, I have been so lacking for so long about recognizing what God's done in my life that I cannot not do this.
Yeah, and somewhat, I mean, my friend Gary Hogue, whom I just love, he calls himself the generosity monk. And he wrote a book called The Sower, which is quite good. And his argument is that generosity is actually a gift of the Spirit. That generosity is something that you're given by the Holy Spirit that does a transformative work that causes you to say, how can I not do this?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what's happening in Pickerington, Ohio.
Right.
Yeah.
However, they're going to have a lot of pizza every Sunday, I think.
And tithing and giving and those things that we do in our regular services, at least we do at our church in our regular services, is an act of worship. I mean, it is for us front and center an act of worship. That is what it is.
Well, it's a part of the sacrifice.
It
I
is.
mean, in our churches, in all of our churches, because we all come from that kind of that Catholic understanding of the table, is that we bring forward the elements on Sunday. We bring the wine and the bread. We bring the money. It all comes up at the same time. And all of those things are including ourselves, which we bring, those are all the sacrifices that we lay before the Lord and ask Him to transform.
That's right.
And I love the fact, I remember early on when I became an Anglican, I thought, why do they bring the offering up with the bread and wine? That just seems so mixing mammon, But no, it is a part of our sacrificial duty. Yes.
This is I think this is something that we shy against talking about money in church or talking about those resources. We often do because we're afraid that voices are going to come back from, you're meddling now, preacher.
Yeah, that's right.
And that we should not be. I mean, I understand maybe what the attempt is here to speak about generosity, but we have to go beyond that. And hopefully they were. We don't know what the rest of the series was. But hopefully they are going beyond that. That's what our prayer would be. As our prayer is now for our audience, too, to go beyond listening to this and head out for really meaningful worship, right? See you next week on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.